That brings us to our exclusive interview with a Republican who guarantees he can beat Hillary, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie.
I love you, New Jersey. Thank you very much.
After his big re-election in 2013, he had the hot hand. But all that changed after Bridgegate.
I am embarrassed and humiliated by the conduct of some of the people on my team.
Now Christie's on the comeback trail. Iowa, South Carolina, New Hampshire.
You're all going to see a lot of me.
With some tough love for fellow Republicans.
My party, quite frankly, has been guilty in some respects of speaking in a way that doesn't sound very welcoming.
Striking specifics on topics like Social Security and a promise to run his own way.
You never have to wonder, ever have to wonder what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling.
And Governor Christie joins us now. Welcome back to This Week.
Thanks, George.
So you saw Hillary Clinton yesterday. She said all the Republican candidates are singing the same song yesterday. What song did you hear from her?
Listen, first off, I thought that Elizabeth Warren wasn't running for president. But when I listened to Hillary yesterday, it sounds like liberal political consultants put together that speech. I think it raises a bigger point for Secretary Clinton. I've done 146 town hall meetings in the last 5 years in New Jersey and around the country. Mrs. Clinton doesn't hear from anybody. She doesn't talk to anybody. She doesn't take questions from anybody. How would she know what real Americans are really concerned about? I don't know. Is it when she's out getting paid speeches? I don't understand when she would know what she was saying yesterday about real Americans. How would she know?
So the gloves are off. I can see that right now. One of her biggest applause lines yesterday when she talked about Americans going to college without drowning in debt. The other Democratic candidates already come out for debt-free college education. You took on that idea this week on your visit to Iowa. What is wrong with it, and what's your alternative?
My alternative is we have to start to put market forces on these college costs. George, I pay for 2 college tuitions right now, one at Princeton and one at Notre Dame. And I can tell you that they're the most opaque bills you'll ever see in your life. If you got that bill for dinner with that little bit detail, you wouldn't pay it. You'd send it back. Yet for college, we pay it. They need to start telling us exactly what they're spending their money on, the money we give them. And secondly, we need to start to say, unbundle that. So if a child doesn't want to pay for all these different things in college, they should be able to select it. That'll tell colleges what they don't need to provide, and we shouldn't have to pay for the things that we don't want to use. That'll help to contain costs. But the idea of free college for everybody, there's nothing free in this world. We need to earn what we get.
But you even pointed out, you talked about your dad and what he got on the GI Bill. Studies show that there's 7-to-1 return on that kind of an investment. Why not for all Americans?
Listen, it is available for all Americans, George. We have grant programs that are very broadly used. We have loan programs that are very broadly used. And by the way, my dad went for 6 years at night. He worked all day to help to put himself through college. So it wasn't that the GI Bill did everything for my father. It helped. It helped for certain. And we should still provide those type of benefits for folks. But my dad also worked every day for 6 years to get his degree all day and then went to school at night.
You told Hewitt that if you run, you will beat Hillary Clinton. So what is holding you back from running right now?
I've got a day job, George, running a significant state with a lot of back and forth. I have a Democratic legislature that I have to work with, and it's not always the easiest thing to do in the world. And we've got a budget to finish by June 30th. We just won a major court decision supporting the pension reforms that we put into place in 2011. So I got to keep my eye on my day job. But as I said, last week, the fact is that this decision is now up to me. I'll make it during the month of June, and then I'll let everybody know. I'm no wallflower. I'll let folks know where I'm going to be.
Last time around, you said you weren't ready to be president. Jeb Bush is getting in tomorrow. What do you offer that he doesn't?
Well, listen, one thing is just what I talked about. I've worked with the legislature of the other party for the last nearly 6 years now, and we've had some significant accomplishments along with significant disagreements. You need to learn how to do that if you're going to be in Washington, D.C.
Jeb Bush did that as a governor, didn't he?
No, he had a legislature of his own party, George. It's a much different thing. And listen, I have great respect for Jeb. He was a very good governor. But if you're asking one of the things that makes me different is I think I'm combat ready for Washington, D.C., and you need to be in order to know how to work with people, how to bring people together. I've done that in New Jersey in a way that led to me getting 61% of the vote for re-election. The fact is that people know I know how to bring folks together and how to fight when I need to. And I think sometimes with folks who are in red states, they don't have as much experience.
You're also laying down some policy markers already, particularly on Social Security. You called for means testing benefits, raising the retirement age. Mike Huckabee, in his announcement, said those ideas are disastrous politics, disastrous for seniors. Take a look.
As president, I promise you will get what you paid for. Because how can anyone ever trust government again if they steal from us and lie to us?
What's your response?
The stealing and the lying already happened. And
Where?
All throughout the system. You know, this idea that Al Gore talked about 15 years ago of a lockbox, that's not true. And the fact is that 71% of federal expenditures now in the budget are on entitlement programs. And so what I'd say to Governor Huckabee or anybody else that takes that position is, then which of the other two alternatives are you for? Insolvency or a massive tax increase on the American people? We need to have reform of these programs. And the kind of reforms I'm talking about, George, are not going to stop the world from spinning on its axis. You know, raising the retirement age 2 years and phasing it over the next 25, or saying to folks who
For people who do blue-collar work, that can be tough.
Over 25 years, George, you know, that with the advancements we've had, both in the quality of life and the length of life, that's not a lot. And secondly, we're talking about means testing for people who have over $200,000 in retirement income, for them to say you don't really need to take a Social Security check to make sure that it's there to ensure that no elderly in our country grow old in poverty, I think that's the kind of thing the American people will support.
You know, you've also said in your speeches you're not a flip-flopper, but let's talk about immigration a little bit. Back on this program, back in 2010, you called for a path to citizenship.
The president and the Congress have to step up to the plate. They have to secure our borders, and they have to put forward a common-sense path to citizenship for people.
But just last month, you called that an extreme position. That's a pretty big flip from common sense to extreme.
Well, and it's also 5.5 years of watching what's happened in this country. George, you know, what we can't be as leaders is slaves to the idea that if circumstances change, we're not going to look at that and evaluate it. And circumstances have
Isn't
changed.
it the politics that have changed?
No, the politics were the same back then. The politics were the same back then, and the president back then was promising with a Democratic Congress that he was going to fix immigration. He never did it. So it's not the politics that have changed. The politics are just as difficult today as they were in 2010. Circumstances on the ground have changed, and we need to be smart about that, and you need to be able to adjust.
Let's talk about Bridgegate a little bit. There's no question it was a big political hit. And you still have more than half the Republicans in New Jersey, according to a recent poll, saying you haven't been completely honest. What do you say to them and other potential supporters who are worried about this issue?
Well, I say to them, listen, there's been 3 independent investigations now, all of whom come to the same conclusion, that I had nothing to do with it, no knowledge of it, didn't direct it, and didn't have anything to do with it. So at some point, you know, the saturation coverage that the media has given this affects people. But over time, people will come to know that when you've had 3 different investigations, one by a partisan Democratic legislature who would have loved to come up with a different conclusion, one by the federal prosecutors, and one internal investigation that we ran, and all came to the same conclusion, I think it's time to move on.
Let's talk about Iraq and the fight against ISIS. We saw President Obama announcing 450 more troops to Iraq this week, considering even expanding that even further. Some of your potential Republican opponents, like Lindsey Graham and Rick Santorum, say we need 10,000 troops on the ground. Are they right?
I don't think they're right at the moment, no. I think what we need to do, and this has been one of the failings of the Obama-Clinton foreign policy, is we need to have our allies trusting us again in the Middle East who want to bring this fight. The Saudis, the Emiratis, the Jordanians, the Egyptians, they want to bring the fight to ISIS.
The Iraqis don't seem too eager for this fight.
Well, listen, you know, we've got to put together a coalition of the willing, which has been used before, George, and used successfully in that region. And what we need to do is to help to arm those folks, help to make sure we train them all the way down to the battalion level, get more human intelligence on the ground so that we make sure we're targeting the right things with targeting ISIS, and also prepare the American people for the fact that this is not going to be easy and it's going to be long. But I don't believe now the idea of putting 10,000 troops on the ground is what we need to do.
But you're not ruling it out?
Well, you can never rule anything out. I think that's a kind of uninformed foreign policy if you rule anything out. What you need to do now, though, is we need to make sure that the folks who are most threatened by ISIS at the moment, which are the folks in the region who want to fight it, that we help to make them the best prepared fighters they can be to take the fight to ISIS. That will give us the best chance of having it not come back here.
Finally, before we go, your buddy Donald Trump says he's making an announcement on Tuesday. You think he'll be a serious candidate for president if he runs?
Listen, Donald's a serious guy, and he's been a good friend of mine over the years, and only Donald's going to be able to determine whether he wants to really be a candidate and really push. If he does, Donald's been able to sell almost anything over the course of time, and the fact is, you'd have to take him seriously if he decides to run. We'll see what happens, though. I like him. He's a good friend. He's been a good friend to me and Mary Pat over the years. We'll see what happens.
Looking forward to taking him on?
Well, listen, if I decide to get into this race, George, I'll take anybody on. I think you know that.
Okay, Governor Christie, thanks very much.